It was night in Asgard, the home of the gods. A soft light fell upon the sleeping city, showing its vine-clad hills and glittering palaces, and touching even the deep, still valleys that lay between. For the trembling bridge bifrost spanned the city like a rainbow of silver, meeting the horizon at the north and south. Towards the south, as far as the eye could reach, rose mountains, with castles upon their tops and sides, while towards the north stretched the level and grassy plains of Ida. From a structure upon the highest place of the city, a shaft shot up, slender and glittering, as a tall spire rises from some great cathedral. It rose high above all the castles and towers, so high as almost to touch the arch of the celestial bridge. This slender shaft was Odin's high seat. From its top could be seen not only Asgard, but also a large part of the worlds below. Here the Allfather sat alone, buried in thought. Alone except for 2 wolves that lay sleeping at his feet, and 2 ravens perched upon his shoulders, weary after their journey through the 9 worlds. After sitting a long while in meditation, Odin looked down upon the stately homes of his children and upon the fields that stretched away beyond the high walls and the dark rushing river that surrounded the city of the gods. Then his eyes tried in vain to pierce the dense blackness that shrouded a land far below him toward the north. He gazed long and earnestly, and at last rose up to descend quickly to the palace just below his high seat. The vast halls resounded as he strode through them. He hastened to a building nearby and soon appeared again leading a grey horse. This horse was well fitted to bear the father of the gods, for he had a powerful frame and 8 legs. As he stood waiting for Odin to mount, he trembled with eagerness, and flames poured from his nostrils. In an instant, Odin was on his back, and the wonderful horse was carrying him towards the north with the speed of the wind. The high wall and the dark river surrounding the city were no obstacle for Sleipnir. He leaped easily over them and kept on his swift way across the fields on the other side, which stretched green and level to the distant horizon. Here and there were grooves, in whose quiet deeps a less rapid traveler might have heard the trickling of fountains, and occasionally a lake reflected on its dark surface the silvery arch of bifrost. At last they reached the point where the celestial bridge touched the outer edge of Asgard. The 8-footed horse rushed unhesitatingly upon the bridge, although it trembled beneath his weight, sending up fitful flames. Like a comet among the stars, Sleipnir sped on, bearing Odin over the black depths. At length a faint light reached them from the north, and soon Odin saw a horseman clad in a white garment coming towards him. The horse had a mane of gold, which shining full upon the rider revealed his pure pale face. Approaching, he said, "Welcome, Father Odin. I have been watching you ever since I heard Sleipnir's 8 hoofs strike the bridge. Doubtless some deep purpose brings you across bifrost at night." "Yes, Heimdall, you have judged rightly," said Odin. "A great matter urges me on, and many days must I journey ere I return home. I must go through the dark land of our enemies, the frost giants of the lower world, and then far beyond, to regions where few have visited. Fortunate are the gods that Heimdall guards for them the trembling bridge. Were it not for your keen ears that hear grass growing and the wool thickening on the backs of sheep, our enemies might ere this have crossed the abyss and have stormed Asgard." As he spoke, they both looked down upon the land beneath them, dark, except for the light that streamed from Heimdall's far shining castle at the bridgehead, and they could see the glistening tops of ice mountains rising above the mist. Our enemies are strong, and I fear the treacherous Loki, who is ever going between Asgard and the giant world. We have need of all your watchfulness, Heimdall, and of all the strength of Thor, the dread foe of the giants, to keep our enemies at bay. What great wisdom do I need to protect the realm of Asgard and the world of men? They kept on their way towards Heimdall's castle, which was on the high mountain near the bridgehead. The castle was apparently made of the same material as the bridge, and as it rose towards the sky, might have been taken for a structure of cloud bathed in moonlight. But in truth it shone with a soft fire of its own, for radiance steamed from it in all directions, lighting up, as we have seen, a part of the cold, foggy land of the giants. The approach to the bridge was in this way made so clearly visible that it would have been impossible for anyone to get near without Heimdall's knowledge, even had his hearing been less keen. Then too, the castle was strongly fortified, surrounded by a high wall and a moat, the waters of which, like those of the Asgard River, were covered with a mist that flashed into flames when disturbed by the enemies of the gods. "Come in, Odin," said Heimdall as they reached the castle. "Your journey has been long, and a hard road lies before you." They entered a hall whose walls were made of something that resembled white marble or alabaster. All the decorations were of silver. Wine-bearing cluster of silver grapes ran along the walls, and curious horns and lamps hung from the arches above. Tall youths, clad like Heimdall in the white, brought in tankards of foaming mead. The two gods drank the mead and talked earnestly together, until at last Odin rose, saying, "One favor I ask you, Heimdall. Keep Sleipnir for me until I return. There are few to whom I would entrust him, but he will be safe with you. I wish to journey unknown through the world of cold and darkness, and the horse would betray me." Heimdall accompanied Odin a short distance down the steep mountains, and then returned to his post to guard the bridge of the gods. As Odin went down into Niflheim, a chilly fog closed about him, shutting out the light from Heimdall's castle and making it hard for him to keep to the path. As he got lower, the cold became intense and his foot slipped on the icy road, which broadened into a river of ice. There were sounds of creaking and crashing, and in the distance could be heard the moaning of waves as they broke upon the desolate shore. As he made his way, he could just distinguish through the mist and darkness the enormous mountains of ice surrounding him. Some of these seeming ice mountains were really frost giants whose huge heads would slowly turn to follow him. Once an iceberg in the sea went to pieces with a noise of distant thunder, and he could long hear the booming and crashing. Sometimes a deluge of icy water would rush upon him from a cascade that he had not perceived, and then he would hear the slow, heavy laughter of the giants, sounding like a roar of hoarse winds. At one point in his journey, he came upon a field of ice, and as the fog lifted, he could see that it stretched on all sides, level and white, covered with snow. Here the sounds of creaking and crashing ceased, and he no longer heard the laughter of the giants. The silence was absolute. He stood alone under the stars. After a long journey through the ice region, Odin reached a country where dark, savage mountains took the place of icebergs, and here and there on their peaks loomed up the strongholds of the mountain giants. As he kept on his way, he could sometimes distinguish the giants themselves looking like huge moving masses of rock. This land was as dreary as the land of ice, for although there was no fog and a faint twilight glimmered, it was very desolate. Not a green thing was to be seen, nothing but grim mountains and dark abysses, at the bottom of which rest rivers finding their way from the spring Hvergelmir to the cold northern sea. The mountains at times gave place to level wastes of great extent, where boulders lay heaped one upon another, with deep still pools lurking among them. Often heavy clouds rolled across the sky, enveloping the mountains. After journeying long, Odin stood upon a high place from which he could look down upon a morass stretching as far as the eye could reach. In the dim light, he could just distinguish a narrow footpath of solid ground leading across it. When he was partly over, one of the giants saw him, and soon a troop of monsters came stumbling after him. Finding it impossible to reach him, they filled the air with their shouts and brandished their great clubs. Upon this fearful wind arose, threatening to blow Odin from the narrow path. Clouds shaped like dragons blew gusts at him from their open mouths, and when he got safely over, howls of disappointed rage resounded long in the air behind. He came next to a river, whose dark, swift current bore with its sharp stones and bits of iron, and no bridge spanned this deadly stream, but Odin crossed it safely on some driftwood. Higher mountains than any he had yet seen now loomed up toward the south, and one higher than the others, down whose sides rushed 12 rivers. On the top of this mountain was the ice-cold spring Hvergelmir. One of the 3 roots of the great world tree Yggdrasil was bathed by the water of this spring, and the rivers that flowed from it went in all directions, some flowing through the cold, foggy lands of the giants to the northern sea, while others flowed toward the south through the vast realms where Mimir and Urd guarded the wells under the other 2 roots of the world tree. As Odin neared the mountain, his way led through a gloomy cave where he could hear the baying of a dog and the creaking of an iron gate. This gate he knew barred the descent to the world of torture below Niflheim, a world far more dark and dreadful than that through which he had just passed. Once out of the cave, the road led over the mountain. On the highest peak stood the solitary watchman, a trusty guardian of the spring and the dreaded foe of the giants. As Odin came near, he greeted him. Did the monsters try to harm you, Odin? The hateful crew would be glad enough to crush the father of the gods and get possession of Asgard. And your Loki is too much with them. I often see him there. He thinks himself well hidden by the darkness, but my eyes are trained to see in the dark. Yes, Egil, replied Odin. Your eyes and Heimdall's ears are the best defense we have against our foes. I came through safely, as you see. Their attacks would have been more fierce had they known me. As for Loki, I am still aware how dangerous he has become. Still, I may not yet turn him out of Asgard, for I am bound by an oath made when we were both young, when I thought him innocent. But I must hasten, Egil. A great purpose urges on me. As Odin went down the southern slopes of the mountain, a pleasant prospect greeted his eyes, varied with the gloomy sights upon which they had been looking for so many days. The country was still mountainous, but it was not black and sterile. Rich metals seamed the rocks, and here and there were the mouths of caves where sparkled crystals and gems. When Odin stopped and listened, he could hear the picks and hammers of the dwarves. Twilight still hung over the scene, but at intervals lights streamed across the sky, their rich colors playing upon the mountains. Odin had now to cross a broad river, and then he could see in the distance a castle of fantastic shape which was ornamented in an unusual manner. Stone dragons grinned from its corners, their large jeweled eyes gleaming like fire as the lights flashed upon them. About the slender columns twined golden snakes and lizards of copper, and metal vines ran thickly along the walls, bearing gems from flowers. A fire shone from one part of the building, and it was evident that work of some kind was going on. This strange castle was the home of Sindri and his brothers, dwarves, and famous artists who had made wonderful weapons and ornaments for the gods. None approached them in skill except the sons of Ivaldi. The latter were partly of giant blood and were said to be magicians as well as artists. Between them and the dwarves there was some rivalry, but as yet no hard feeling. Odin passed near the castle but did not enter. As he went on, the mountains lost all their savage wilderness and rose in gentle outlines against the sky. They were clothed with forests and vineyards. Down their slopes rushed brooks, changing into cascades of mist. Peaceful valleys stretched between the mountains, while high above all were clouds, glowing with the colors of an eternal sunset. For this was a land where dark night and glaring midday never came. The mountains gradually softened into hills, and these at last were lost in broad stretches of level fields covered with golden grain or tall waving grass. The rivers glided along, deep and peaceful. Flowers bloomed everywhere, their bright colors reflected in the still waters of little ponds. Herds of deer came timidly up to Odin, and birds sang to him as he passed. Only the gentlest breeze stirred the leaves, and all sounds were low and sweet. Along the southern horizon there now appeared a bank of white clouds piled high one upon another. But as Odin neared them, they changed to mountains of marble, evidently enclosing some sacred spot. Like pure white sentinels they stood, bathed with rich colors. There seemed to be no entrance through this marble wall, but when Odin reached it, he knocked with his staff and the door was opened. A man of grave and reverent aspect greeted him and led the way through a spacious cave sparkling with crystals that reflected the light of his torch. At the further end of the cave was a door, larger than the one by which Odin had entered, opening into a circular valley. The sides of the valley were formed by the marble mountains, but they did not look like mountains on the inside, for they had been carved into beautiful shapes, and delicate vines ran over them, veiling the whiteness of the marble. From the center of the valley grew the root of the enormous world tree, and the waters of the deep well of wisdom bathed the root of the tree. At the further end of the valley rose a stately palace. Here and there were groups of trees, and rare plants bloomed on all sides. Near a pool, a large turtle, his back covered with the incrustations of ages, basked lazily in the light. Harmless serpents with brilliant eyes twined about the trunks of the tree. Dragons slept with folded wings, while many ancient and uncouth monsters rested amid the groves or sunned themselves in the niches of the marble walls. Gay-colored birds flitted in and out among the branches, and peacocks walked proudly about, spreading their tails. The scene was made more fair by the light that fell upon it. It was not sunlight, and one could not tell whence it came, but it flooded the peaceful valley with the softest radiance. Odin stood for a few moments looking at the scene before him, and then walked slowly toward the center of the valley. Under the foot of the world tree sat a man of giant stature, apparently absorbed in watching the waters of the well. Long silver locks floated over his shoulders, and a white beard fell upon his breast. There was no look of old age in his face, although as he raised his head, the wisdom of the centuries gleamed from his deep blue eyes, and his whole aspect expressed perfect peace. His hand rested upon the edge of the well, which was thickly overlaid with gold. Near him stood an immense chest, curiously carved, containing treasures from bygone ages. A large horn of silver lay upon the chest, bearing Heimdall's name in runic characters of gold. As Odin came near, Mimir rose, saying, "Welcome, Odin. You come from the north, I see. This time you have chosen the hard road, and on foot too." "Yes, Mimir," answered Odin. "I chose that road because I wish to explore the land of my enemies, and I have come to you for counsel and help." "Gladly will I help you, as you know," said Mimir. "I know your readiness," replied Odin, "but this time I ask what no one has ever asked of you. My realm is beset with dangers. Loki grows in wickedness. He is taken for his wife, the witch of the iron wood, and their children threaten to prove our most formidable foes. And the frost giants and the mountain giants, as you know, are only too ready to attack us whenever there is a chance of success. I need great wisdom rightly to govern and protect Asgard and Midgard, the world of men." Both were silent for a moment, and then Odin said, looking earnestly at Mimir, "In order that I may gain this wisdom, I ask for one drink from your deep well." After a long silence, Mimir said slowly, "You have asked a great thing, Odin. Are you prepared to pay the price for it?" "Yes," replied Odin eagerly. "All of the gold of Asgard, our best swords, our jeweled shields, even Sleipnir will I give you for one draught of the precious water." "These things will not buy what you desire," said Mimir. "Wisdom can be gained only by suffering and sacrifice. Would you give one of your eyes for wisdom?" A cloud came over the bold face of Odin, and he pondered long. Finally he said slowly, "I will give one of my eyes, and I will suffer whatever else is necessary, if I may thereby gain the wisdom I need." No one ever knew all that Odin suffered and learned in that mysterious valley. Some say that he really gave one of his eyes in return for the drink from Mimir's well. But as nothing is said of that in the old song called Odin's Rune Song, and as the fact of his being one-eyed is not mentioned in some of the oldest poems, it seems doubtful whether that sacrifice was required of him. Odin says in his rune song, "I know that I hung on a wind-rocked tree 9 whole nights with a spear wounded, and to Odin offered myself to myself on that tree of which no one knows from what root it springs. Bread no one gave me, nor a horn of drink. Downward I peered to runes applied myself, wailing learned them, then fell down thence. Potent songs 9 from the famed son I learned of Bölthorn, Bestla's sire, and a draught obtained of the precious mead drawn from Othrærir. Then I began to bear fruit, and to know many things, to grow and well thrive. Word by word I sought out words, fact by fact I sought out facts. Odin returned to Asgard after a long absence, and all noticed that he looked more grave and majestic than ever. He spoke to no one but Frigga, his wife, of the wonderful things he had seen and heard. Frigga never revealed what was told her in confidence. Loki was away when Odin returned, and the latter at once took steps to place the children of the treacherous god and the witch of the iron wood where they could do no harm. The children were worthy of their parents. One was a wolf, Fenrir, not yet fully grown. Him Odin had brought to Asgard and given in charge of Tyr, one of the strongest and bravest of the Æsir. Another was a dangerous serpent, and he was put into the river ocean that surrounded Midgard, the world of men. As soon as he touched the bottom of the sea, he began to grow, and grew so fast that before long he reached entirely around Midgard, and his tail, finding no other place, grew down his throat. He was called the Midgard Serpent from that time forth. But more dreadful in appearance than either of these monsters was the third. She had the form of a woman, but the hard heart of her mother, the witch of the iron wood, and her half-body was a deathly white color, so that no one could bear to look upon her. Odin sent her to Earth, guardian of the fountain under the third root of the world tree, and ruler of all the realms of the dead. She made this dreadful being queen of the world of torture under Niflheim. Loki's last two children were all disposed of, for the present at least, but the wolf Fenrir kept growing stronger and fiercer each day, and Tyr, powerful as he was, found it no easy matter to control him. After consulting together, the gods decided to bind him with an iron chain. There was a smithy in Asgard with the best facilities for making all kinds of metal things, such as chains, swords, shields, and axes. And in this smithy the gods forged a chain larger and stronger than any had ever been seen in Asgard. They took it to Fenrir and asked him to amuse them by showing his strength. Fenrir was very proud of his strength, and as soon as he saw the chain, he knew he could easily break it. So he let them bind him, standing quietly as they did so. When they had finished, he stretched his limbs, and the chain instantly broke in several places. The gods pretended to consider it a good joke and praised the wolf for his strength, saying they would try the game again someday. They now realized that to make a chain strong enough to bind the wolf was likely to prove no easy task. This time the most skillful workers in metal were secured, and they did their best to make the second chain the strongest that could possibly be forged. When it was finished, all declared that nothing like it had ever been seen in all the 9 worlds. They went to Fenrir as before, but when he saw them bringing a chain so heavy that it took several gods merely to drag it along the ground, his suspicions were aroused. He refused to be bound. Then they appealed to his pride till his strength swelled within him, and eager to show his power, he let them wind the chain around till his whole body was covered with iron links. Then he rolled on the ground and stretched his huge limbs, and the bonds burst as though made of some brittle metal. The gods dissembled their feelings as best they could and praised the strength and courage of the wolf more than ever. Odin, with his great wisdom, realized how important it was that Fenrir should be bound. Finding that Asgard could not produce a chain strong enough for that purpose, he sent Skirnir to the home of the dark elves to get one. For great as the gods were, the elves and giants knew more about some things than they did. And indeed the dark elves must have been very wise and skillful to have made the chain which they gave Skirnir. How they managed to get the materials of which it was composed is a mystery, for it was made of 6 things seldom seen in Ásgard or Midgard, namely the footfalls of a cat, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of birds. One could believe almost anything of a chain made of such things. It is no wonder that it was as soft and smooth as a silken string, and that its strength was greater than that of any chain made since the 9 worlds were formed. Skirnir did his errand very quickly, considering the long distance he had to go, and happy were the gods when he returned with a delicate silken string. They felt sure of success now, for things made by the dark elves always possessed wonderful properties. In order to disarm the suspicions of Fenrir, the gods planned an excursion to a rocky island, pretending that the sole object of the trip was amusement. The amusement was to consist mainly of trials of strength. Fenrir went with them. Had he discovered any chain, he would have suspected foul play, but there was nothing of the kind to be seen. As soon as they reached the island, the sports began. They ran races, leaped over barriers, shot with bows, wrestled, and in short did all those things that test man's strength and skill. After the trials were ended and the victors had been crowned, they sat on the grass near Fenrir, talking and jesting. One of the gods then drew from his bosom the magic chain, and handling it to his neighbor said, "They say this cord is stronger than it looks. See if you can break it." The one to whom it was given to tried in vain, and then with a jest he passed it to the god next him, and so it went the rounds. When all had tried and failed, Skirnir said, as though struck by a sudden thought, "Let Fenrir try it. He has strength in breaking chains if he can do nothing else." So one of the gods held up the cord, saying, "Would you like to try your strength on this little string, Fenrir? Perhaps you will scorn to be bound by so slight a thing, but it is too strong for our hands to break." The wolf refused the trial, for he suspected treachery. Then they taunted him, saying that only a coward would refuse to be bound by such a cobweb. Their taunts stirred Fenrir's pride, and he finally agreed to let them bind the chain about him if one of their numbers would put his right hand into his jaws while it was being done, as a pledge of their good faith. Upon this the gods looked at one another in dismay, but after an instant's pause, Tyr, well knowing what the result would be, stepped up to the wolf and thrust his right hand into the jaws, saying with a laugh, "You see, it is only a joke, Fenrir." The wolf let them bind him, and when the magic cord was tightly around, the gods moved away, all but Tyr, for they knew the struggle would be terrible. The monster now stretched his limb, and finding that more he struggled, the tighter grew the string. He bit Tyr's hand off at the wrist and then rolled on the ground, rending the air with his howls of rage and despair. When he had worn himself out with his desperate struggles, the god secured him and took him back to Ásgard. Odin had him carried to a dark cave on a rocky island in the regions of torture below Niflheim. He was chained to a rock that was sunk far into the earth, and his jaws were kept open by a sword that was thrust into them so that the hilt stood in the lower jaw and the point in the roof of his mouth. From his jaws flowed a poisonous river. There he would remain chained until Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, should come. Brave Tyr, by his sacrifice, had saved Ásgard from a dangerous foe. Each day Odin and the other gods rode over Bifrost, going towards the south, and went down to the lower world. Near the southern end of the celestial bridge was the well that watered the third root of Yggdrasil. An old book says that the waters of this well were so holy that everything that is put in the well becomes as white as the membrane between the egg and the eggshell. The roots of Yggdrasil were continually sprinkled with its waters and were as white as silver in consequence. Two swans of purest white, the parents of all the swans that have ever been, glided over its surface, and its edge, like that of Mimir's well, was thickly overlaid with gold. Urd, the great Norn, who was the queen of the world of the dead, dwelt near the well with her two sisters. Multitudes of messengers and attendants stood ready to do her bidding, for her realms were vast, her powers extending even to the dark region under Niflheim. All beings who died in Midgard came first to the great judgment hall near her well, and it was to meet them there, and with Urd to pass judgment upon them, that the gods crossed each day the trembling bridge and came to the lower world. Thor, the thunder god, could not pass over the bridge because his heavy iron chariot would have injured it, so he was obliged to ford 3 rivers on his way. The great judgment hall was a solemn place, and the decisions pronounced there, whether gentle or severe, were always just. Mortals who had been very wicked were sent to the world of torture. Those who had died on the field of battle were claimed by Odin, the Allfather, or by Freyja, a van goddess who lived in Ásgard with the Æsir. Odin sent his maidens, the Valkyrias, to choose the heroes on the battlefield and conduct them to Ásgard. They went to his great palace of Valhalla, and there they feasted and fought each day, that they might be ready to do battle with the powers of evil when Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, should come. Freyja united again lovers who had been faithful unto death. Mortals whose lives had been peaceful and pure went to a home prepared for them by Urd, in a land where the fields stretched green and beautiful, and where it was always summer. None of the gods stood so high in the judgment hall of the dead as Baldur. While he was not famed as a fighter or noted for his strength, his pure heart and righteous life made his judgment so clear that his decisions were absolutely just, and once spoken were never questioned. Besides being a perfect judge, Baldur had other qualities that made everyone love him, even the strong and fierce. He was so full of kindness and empathy that wherever he went, the sun shone more brightly and joy filled all hearts. From the first, his life had been blameless, and his one aim had been to make others happy. The loveliness of his character was expressed in his face and in his form. He was the most beautiful of all gods. Indeed, they often called him Baldur the Beautiful, and in Midgard, men named the whitest flower they could find Baldur's brow. But dearly loved as he was, Baldur had one deadly enemy, the false, vindicative Loki. Loki secretly hated all the gods, but none so much as Baldur. His fierce jealousy was stirred because Baldur held such a high place in Asgard. He hated him as the darkness hates the light, and as evil abhors good, and all his plots and schemes tended to one end, the destruction of this hated being. He had long hoped to bring about in some way the downfall of Odin and the ruin of Asgard. But first he would kill Baldur, for well he knew that nothing would cause such universal grief as his death. Baldur, the beloved of the gods, had grown sad. His palace, the hall of broad shining splendor, no longer gave him pleasure, and Nanna, his wife, could not comfort him. His voice was not heard in the council hall of the gods. Finally, after suffering long in silence, he confided in Odin and Frigga the cause of his sorrow. Every night for a long while he had been tormented by dreams which told him that the day of his death was not far distant, that he must leave the home he loved so well to dwell in the underworld apart from all his brethren. This thought made him so sad that the most joyous sights and sounds could not drive away his melancholy. Odin at once called a council of all the gods and goddesses, and after conferring together, they sent some of their number to consult wise giants and other beings who knew more of the future than they themselves knew. All said that Baldur must die. Then it was determined that from every living creature and from all plants and metals, the oath not to harm Baldur should be exacted. Frigga received their oaths, and for days Asgard was thronged with the multitudes of beings who came to take the solemn oath, until finally all had sworn. But even this did not satisfy Odin. He resolved to go to the lower world and there seek information about the fate of his son. Sleipnir was saddled, and the Allfather took the same road that he had traveled when he visited the realms of Mimir in the search of wisdom. Again he crossed the celestial bridge, going towards the north, and passed again the shining castle of Heimdall, the sleepless watchman. But this time Sleipnir bore him swiftly through the dark ice regions and the gloomy land of the mountain giants. As he was going toward the south, a dog met him, having come evidently from the cave near Mount Hvergelmir. The breast of the dog was bloody, and so were his throat and his lower jaw. He barked furiously at Odin and howled long after he had passed, but the Allfather rode on, not heeding him. In the eastern part of Mimir's realm, near the home of Detling, the elf of the dawn, Odin came to a dense forest that he could not remember having seen before. Yet the locality was familiar to him, and he knew that a little further to the east was the grave of the Vala, whom he wished to consult. After penetrating for a long distance into the silent depths of the wood, he came to a wall higher than any around Asgard. However, Sleipnir was not daunted by this obstacle, and in an instant Odin found himself in the large garden, from the midst of which rose a castle of singular beauty. The doors stood hospitably open. Evidently no enemies were anticipated in this charmed spot, protected by forest and wall. The Allfather dismounted and entered. Tall men and fair women walked about the castle and talked together in small groups, and there were preparations as for some honored guest whose coming was expected. At the upper end of the hall was a throne of gold, and near it benches strewn with rings and ornaments, while on the table the meat stood ready, but it was covered with a shield. As Odin entered, a graceful youth came forward, saying reverently, "Are you the good king and the wise that Mimir has long promised us? You see that everything is in readiness and your subjects await you with impatience." And Odin answered, "I am indeed the king of a fair realm, but not your king. What is the name of him who is to rule over you?" The youth replied, "Mimir has not told us his name, but we know he is to come ere long, and he will be so noble and pure that we shall all love him and serve him gladly." Odin sighed, thinking of Baldur. After talking a little with the inhabitants of the castle, the Allfather left them and made his way out of the forest. Upon reaching the grave of Vala, Odin chanted a magic song, compelling her to rise and answer him. She rose and with a death-like voice said, "What man is this, to me unknown, who has for me increased an irksome course? I have with snow been decked, by rain beaten, and with dew moistened. Long have I been dead." Odin did not give his real name, but said, "Vegtam is my name. I am Veltam's son. Tell me what I wish to know of the realms of dead. From earth I call on you. From who are those benches strewn o'er with rings, and those costly couches o'erlaid with gold?" And the Vala answered, "Mead stands for Baldur brewed. Over the bright potion a shield is laid, but the Aesir race are in despair. By compulsion I have spoken, I will now be silent." Then Odin spoke again. "Be not silent, Vala. I will question you until I know all. I must yet know who will Baldur's slayer be, who will kill the son of Odin." The Vala said, "Hödur will thither his glorious brother send. He will the slayer of Baldur be. He will kill the son of Odin. By compulsion I have spoken. I will now be silent." However, Odin kept on questioning the Vala until he asked something that revealed his true character, and she said, "Not Vegtam are you, as I before believed. You are Odin, Lord of men. Homeward ride, Odin, and exult. Nevermore shall man thus visit me until Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, have come." As she said this, the Vala sank back into the earth, and Odin rode again to Asgard, little comforted by what he had learned in the lower world. It seemed as though death could not come near Baldur now, for all beings had sworn that they would not hurt him. The purest of the gods was surely saved. One day he chanced to be hit by an arrow, and had another been in his place, the wound would have been fatal. But when the arrow touched him, it was blunted, and he was not hurt. Seeing this, some of the gods begged him to stand as a mark while they amused themselves by hurling things at him. Stones, spears, arrows, and swords. Nothing could harm him. Loki passed by as the Aesir were enjoying this game, and fierce jealousy filled his heart when he saw Baldur so calm in a position that would have meant death to any other being. Taking the form of a decrepit old woman, Loki went to the mansion of Frigga and asked alms. Frigga gave the seeming beggar something and then asked what the gods were doing as she crossed the plains of Ida. The woman replied that they were throwing stones and weapons at Baldur, who stood there unhurt. "Ah," exclaimed the queen, "they cannot harm him now, whatever his dreams may be, for I have exacted an oath from all things." "What?" said the woman in a weak, shaky voice. "Have all things sworn not to harm him?" "Yes," replied Frigga, "all things." Then she added carelessly, "There was a little shrub, the mistletoe that grows on the eastern side of Valhalla, too weak to do any harm. I did not exact an oath from that." Had Frigga been watching the old woman narrowly, she would have seen a look of triumph come over her face as she heard these words. But the queen of the gods scarcely noticed her, so absorbed was she in thinking of her dear son. And the beggar crept quietly out of the palace and disappeared behind a clump of bushes. In a few moments, Loki was talking gaily with the gods on the plains of Ida and congratulating Baldur on his ability to stand unhurt amid a shower of weapons. After dark, when all Asgard was asleep, a form might have been seen creeping stealthily towards the eastern side of Valhalla. It was Loki. When he found the slender mistletoe, he pulled it up by the roots and hid it in his bosom. From that time it never left him, and he was continually planning to get some skillful maker of weapons to form from it an arrow fatal to Baldur. Loki once cut off the beautiful hair of Sif, Thor's wife, and when Thor found out that Loki was the culprit, he threatened to crush every bone in his body if he did not repair the mischief he had done. Loki promised to do this, for he feared Thor. He went at once to the sons of Ivaldi for help. They were famous artists, the sons of Ivaldi. Many were the weapons and ornaments they had made for the gods. They quickly spun some golden hair for Sif. This wonderful hair grew to her head, becoming like her own, except it was gold. Besides this, they sent a spear to Odin and a ship to Frey. The spear was sure to hit the mark each time, and the ship, called Skidbladnir, could be folded up like a napkin and put into the pocket when not in use. It would always have fair winds. It has been told how Odin, on his journey to Mimir's well, passed near the singular hall of the dwarf Sindri and his brothers. One day when Loki was near there, it occurred to him that it would be an easy matter to stir up jealousy between the two sets of artists. Perhaps, too, he could at the same time make trouble between them and the gods. One of Sindri's brothers was outside the castle as Loki came near, and the latter at once began to talk with him about the making of beautiful and curious objects. Loki described the wonderful gifts the son of Ivaldi had sent the gods by him, and then said, "I will wager my head that you cannot make, you and your brothers, 3 treasures as good as those I have just described." The dwarf was angry at this disparagement of their skill and hurried into the hall to tell Sindri of Loki's wager. Loki went in after him and repeated what he had said, adding that if they would make the gifts, the gods themselves should be the judges and pronounce upon the merits of their rival artists. They went to the smithy, which was in the other part of the castle. The heat from the great furnace was so intense that even Loki, who loved fire, could hardly bear it. Sindri took down a pigskin that was hanging on the wall, and putting it into the furnace, told his brother Brok to blow the bellows and not stop blowing until he took the pigskin out. Loki stepped behind some ironwork, and instantly a fly appeared upon the hand of Brok as he was blowing the bellows and stung him badly, but he bore the pain and did not stop blowing. Very soon, Sindri drew from the furnace a boar with golden bristles. Next, Sindri put some gold into the furnace, giving his brother the same directions. This time the fly settled upon Brok's neck and stung him so that he lifted his shoulders but still kept on blowing. The result was a ring. The next time Sindri put iron into the furnace, and as Brok was blowing, the fly buzzed angrily and settling between his eyes, stung him so severely on the eyelid that the blood ran down into his eye and he could not see. He stopped blowing for an instant and brushed the fly away. A hammer came out this time, but the handle was a little too short. The 3 treasures were now finished, and Loki left the dwarves, naming a day for them to meet him in Ásgard. He set out at once for the home of the sons of Ivaldi. One of these artists, Thiassi, who was as large as a giant and who was said to have great skill as a magician, went with him to Ásgard. The treasures made by the last named artists were already in the possession of the gods. It was a fair morning in the beautiful city when the judgment was to be pronounced. Gladsheim glittered in the sun. Upon its marble walls were pictured the wonders of the 9 worlds and the mighty deeds of gods and heroes in the earliest times. Mimir's mysterious valley, Urd's pure fountain, Mount Hvergelmir with its ice-cold spring, all could be seen on those vast walls. And there too were Surt's fiery dales below the realms of Urd, the dark, misty regions of Nibelheim, and even the world of torture with its stagnant sea. In other pictures lived again the strange beings and huge uncaught monsters of the ancient world. The great hall of Gladsheim was to be the scene of the judgment. There was Odin's throne. Over it rose the Ark of Bifrost, so like the real bridge that it sent forth fitful flames. Back of the throne was a golden tree representing Yggdrasil, the world tree. The trembling leaves flashed in the sunlight that streamed in through the eastern openings. Sif, with her golden hair, sat near a table in the center of the hall, and upon the table lay Odin's spear and Frey's ship, made by the sons of Ivaldi. The hour had come, and all eyes were turned towards the wide door as Loki entered, accompanied by the enormous Thiassi. Loki's eyes sparkled with malicious pleasure, and after his reverence to Odin, he began talking gaily with the other gods. Thiassi came in awkwardly, as though unused to scenes of such grandeur and beauty. He saluted Odin and the greater gods and then seated himself near Sif, who tried in vain to make him talk with her. In a few moments, 2 diminutive figures appeared at the great entrance, and with them a large boar whose golden bristles dazzled the eyes. One of the dwarfs led the boar, while the other carried a small hammer. They paid their respects to Odin and the other gods in a peculiar jerky manner, and then stood looking about with eager, inquisitive faces. Odin rose up and said in a deep voice, "We are here to decide upon the comparative skill of 2 sets of artists. They are both very skillful, and we are indebted to both for many rare and valuable gifts. It will be a difficult task to judge rightly, and we regret that Loki has made a judgment necessary. He, however, has promised to forfeit his head to Sindri and his brothers should the decision be in their favor." He paused a moment and all looked at Loki's head, on which the stiff red hair gleamed like fire. A smile lurked about his treacherous mouth and his eyes twinkled. Odin went on, "Let Thias state the peculiar properties and special merits of his work and that of his brothers, and then Sindri shall follow him and speak of his gifts." Thias rose up, a sullen, defiant look in his face. Evidently he was forced to play a part ill-suited to him. Pointing to Sif, he said, "There is Thor's wife. You can all see her golden hair. It needs no praise." Taking up the spear that lay on the table, he went on, "This is a good spear. It never misses the mark." He next took from the table what seemed to be a white napkin, but as he held it, it bloomed and spread until a ship appeared that grew larger and larger while he talked. "This ship is like no other," he said. "It can be made small enough to be carried in the pocket or large enough to hold many men. It always has a fair wind." Thias did not raise his eyes as he talked, but uttered every sentence as though it cost him an effort, making long pauses between. When he had finished speaking, he put the ship, which again looked like a napkin, upon the table and with a sigh of relief sat down. Sindri then came forward, his small bright eyes peering everywhere and his face eager and excited. His brother stood by his side, watching him intently and imitating all his gestures. Sindri pointed to the boar, saying, "This boar is worthy of higher praise than I can give him. You see how his golden bristles flash in the sunlight, but in the darkest night their brightness is the same. On this boar Frey can ride through Niflheim itself and still have day, and so swift is he that Sleipnir with his 8 legs cannot outrun him. He can fly through the air and skim over the sea as his rider wills." As he said this, Sindri looked keenly at Thiassi, as though searching in his face for a look of conscious defeat. He next drew from his bosom a ring, and as he held it up to the sunlight, all could see the stones of many colors that sparkled in the setting of yellow gold. After gazing upon it for a moment, as though fascinated by the beautiful object, Sindri spoke. "Were this ring merely what it seems, it would need no words of mine. But it has most marvelous property. Every 9th night, 8 rings of equal size and beauty drop from it. There is not another treasure like it in all the 9 worlds." And Sindri put the ring down slowly, as though loath to part with it. He then took the hammer from his brother, and as he raised it, that it might be seen by all, it grew larger and larger until the strength of both dwarfs was needed merely to hold it upright on the floor. With a look of triumph, Sindri cried, "This mighty hammer called Mjölnir will be more useful to Thor when he meets the frost giants than his wife's golden hair. It will strike whatever it is aimed at without fail. Let the thing be large or small, and it will always return to the hand that flings it. Besides, it can be easily carried, for it can be made so small as to go into the pocket." He glanced at Loki as he added, "To be sure, the handle is a little too short." As Sindri finished speaking, he and his brother looked around exultingly. Thias's face was expressionless, except for a haughty curl of the lip. After a short pause, Odin rose, saying, Let Sif come here and let all the treasures be brought. We will examine them carefully and then pronounce our judgment." While the gods were examining and consulting, the dwarves watched them intently, their quick glance going from one to another. But Thiassi sat motionless, his head buried in his hands, apparently half asleep. After a long consultation, silence was commanded. As Odin rose, every eye was fastened upon him. "It has been a hard task," he began, "to decide between such wonderful and useful gifts, but a decision must be given. We consider that the gifts made by the dwarfs Sindri and his brothers surpass in some respects those made by the sons of Ivaldi." Then turning to Loki, he added, "Loki, you have forfeited your head. Defend yourself as best you can." As Odin pronounced the judgment, a look of disappointment came into Thias's countenance, followed by an expression of fierce hatred, and bitter words escaped through his closed teeth. But the face of the two dwarfs beamed with triumph and delight. Sindri instantly sprang towards Loki, crying, "Your head belongs to me, you crafty god. Never again shall you turn yourself into a fly to spoil the work of Sindri. Your red hair will make bristles for my next boar." He tried to seize Loki while he drew from beneath his mantle a large knife. The nimble god slipped from his grasps, however, and was instantly out of the hall and speeding like the wind over the plains of Ida. Sindri called for help. Then Thor, laughing mightily at the fanatic rage of the dwarf, took up his hammer and cried in a voice of thunder, "Come back, you coward, or I will try my hammer on you. Remember, it always hits." The sound of Thor's voice produced a quick effect upon the runaway. He stopped and came slowly back to the palace. "Try your wits, now your heels have failed you," said Thor. As the dwarf again approached Loki, prepared to cut off his head, the latter cried, "The head is yours, but not the neck." Sindri stopped and looked questioningly at the gods, and they all said, "Loki is right, not the neck." "I am cheated," yelled the angry dwarf, and quickly seizing his brother's awl, he sprang towards Loki, and in an instant had sewed his lips together with a stout thread. Thereupon he and his brother left the hall. Thiassi was nowhere to be seen. He had disappeared while Sindri and Loki were disputing. Well had Loki succeeded in stirring up jealousy and hatred where all had been peace and goodwill. Thiassi had left the great palace full of rage against the gods and with a plan for revenge already seething in his brain, while Sindri and his brothers were equally angry at the loss of their wager and at the mirth of the gods at their expense. Besides, the bitterest jealousy was now aroused between the two sets of artists.